Yes.
Awesome. And can everyone hear my voice all right? Sometimes this microphone gets a little muddled, although possibly because I mumble. Yeah, so great. So I'm going to talk about GDScript, which is, as I call it, the Bizarro, which is not quite a fair term, Python-inspired language of Godot, a 3D game engine. So first of all, what is GDScript? Like I said, it's a scripting language, but probably the clearest explanation is GDScript is Godot script. So the real question is, what is Godot in the context of that? And so Godot is a game engine. It is a cross-platform game engine. It is a fully MIT licensed, so it has very permissive licensing. It has extremely low memory footprint. So it's one of those things where you're just like, I can't believe how fast this is. It loads up pretty much instantly. I've run it on a Raspberry Pi 4 on a Chromebook that has Linux support and so on. It was created by Juan Linietsky from Spain. So it's very internationally based. It's very much kind of has a lot of internationalization built into it. It's become very feature rich. It's currently on stable releases 3.2, and they're working on version 4 pretty soon. But there's a huge amount of features in there. So if you're to look at other game engines, and I'm going to presume everyone roughly knows what a game engine is and something to build a game on, such as Unity or Unreal, which are the big commercial engines right now, it's actually got a lot of competitive features to it. And it's got full support for 2D and 3D exports to desktop, mobile, web. I've heard of Nintendo Switch exports as well. So it's got a lot of, it's had a huge amount of growth in the last couple of years in the hobby and indie game dev space. People are publishing games to Steam, to app stores, and so on. And it's got a pretty big community at this point. And the URL, if you're curious, is Godot engine down there, .org, hosted by Read the Docs. I think still, right? Yeah. So here's just a quick screenshot. This is what the Godot editor looks in its simplest form, like new project. So you can see it kind of starts out in 3D, but it can be 2D also. But I'll talk, and this is kind of an example where you actually have a scene where you've got lots of nodes in it, and you have some details on the right, and you have the node tree on the left that I'll talk more about. And then here's a bunch of screenshots from games that I just pulled from the Godot engine showcase. These are games that are, I guess, in production at this point in time. I know the one on the top left is on the Steam store and has some pretty good ratings and so on. So there are published games at this point with this engine. Here are some of the not so pretty looking screenshots of various hobby games. So that's my whole deal, is that I have a real day job, but I like to build games on the side with friends and stuff like that. And so here's a bunch of screenshots. So it's pretty accessible, even if you're like me and don't have time to make things look nice. And just why I like it, again, it's super fast, which I really appreciate, especially if you try to load up Unity or Unreal, which is the opposite. They're not super fast. And it's got a very consistent data model. It's MIT licensed, very feature rich. And of course, GDScript feels like Python, which is very familiar to me. And of course, I'm biased because I make games for fun, not for profit. So maybe if I was really on the tail end of things and trying to get something out the door, maybe I'd see some more flaws. All right, so going back to GDScript and why it's interesting here. So GDScript's the default primary scripting language of Godot engine. It's purposely built to integrate tightly. It's not a full feature language. So this is not a full Python. You can't actually use GDScript external to Godot script. It's really just a scripting language baked into the engine. And it's inspired by Python, Lua, and JavaScript. So it's got a lot of echoes of those different things. It looks a lot like Python, but it's definitely not Python. And this isn't to say you have to use GDScript. They do have bindings for Rust, for C#, and even I think for Python external to Godot, so you can actually roll those into your game if you're using something like that. But it's not guaranteed, but it's definitely the default primary language of Godot. Why they created it, again, I just lifted this from the FAQ. Number one, and very valid for Python, is poor threading support. Games really need threads. They need to be able to be spread on different cores. They need to maximize the usage of cores. Some of the other ones are a little more opinionated, but the other valuable one I saw is no vector type. So games inherently use a lot of vector math, vector threes, and there's a lot of optimizations there. So having really baked in to the language has a lot of advantages. Another big one is garbage collection. So in a game, if you have a garbage collector kind of just going to jump out of nowhere and start just cleaning up references, that'll cause stuttering and problems. So having basically no garbage collection, having your script really just kind of wrapping around very, very consistent C++ code is really going to make for a better experience. All right, so just going to go through a general comparison of GDScript and Python. So what's similar is that it's got a very Python like syntax with the indented blocks, colons, and so on. Dynamically typed variables. It's got the Python dictionaries and lists look the same in GDScript. It's got loops and flows like if, else, elif, for, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And then, while and so on. And it's got like even the type hints I think are pretty close, although I have to admit, I don't use type hints a lot in Python. So I just saw that somewhere. I was like, that looks the same. So those are a lot of consistent things. So if you're really to look at it, I mean, obviously, probably all of you are noticing the var keyword, and I'll talk about that in a second. But at first pass, it really looks and feels a lot like Python, which is great. I think there's a lot of, it's easy to transition between one and the other in terms of just your basic imperative, writing of code. Things that are different than Python. So first of all, funcs are called def. Def is not def for function, it's called func for whatever reason. The variables are defined with a var keyword. There's also const. So those are kind of more specific things. That's kind of an echo of JavaScript right there. They have enumerations. I don't think Python has enumerations. Maybe it does. Self is implied like Java. So if you call a function name, you don't have to say self dot blah, blah, blah. You don't pass self around everywhere. That's all implied like Java or something else like that. And inheritance. So basically every GDScript file that you have is basically extending a base class. It's attached to a node in the system. So it's kind of very much enforced. If you have say a physics body, you want to customize the functionality, you extend physics body, and then you write down your code in there. And you can still tap into things, and you can build like inner classes inside that. But generally, you're basically one file, one class. And there's some changes in the way you talk to super and call parent stuff there as well. There's a bunch of special features in GDScript that are extra and very specific to the engine. So vector 3, vector 2s obviously are just everywhere for handling math. There's a node path lookup, so you're always kind of in this node tree environment, and there's paths, and so you can say, if I've got an example here, your body animation player. So if you're like in a physics body and has an animation player, to maybe like do something, you can just reference a kind of a relative link right in there in shorthand, and the compiler will pull that all together for you and create the reference object automatically. It's got an onReady keyword that just on instantiation assigns some of the things that kind of ties into that reference. There's a signal keyword, so you can declaratively state, I'm going to have a signal here, which signals can be used to attach. So an event happens, oh, my ammo is run out, I want a signal. So then if you're in a game and you're in another scene and you've got the instance, you can say, let me do something when this thing fires the event of ammo depleted, and go, do this or that, play a sound, whatever. There's also the tool keyword, so it declares editor functionality I talk about, and they do have coroutines, except it's a function, not a keyword, so it's slightly different. I haven't really delved into that too much. In terms of similarities, control flow, so I really think that's pretty much very similar. There's a great GDScript basics thing that you go through. It's a one pager. And I think if you know Python, you're like, okay, I get this. And you'll make a couple mistakes as you're hammering away, but eventually you'll get it probably within the hour, and you'll be moving pretty quick. In terms of differences, it's really important to mention like Python's a full-fledged programming language. You can like open up files, you can do stuff, you can talk to other libraries. GDScript can do a lot of those things, but it only runs within Godot. It feels a lot like ActionScript for those of you who can reach that far back into memory. It feels like you're in this environment. It's really just this cool language that's tailor built for it. And then all these GDScripts are attached to nodes, which is the construct of scenes. And so you got to kind of understand the underlying architecture of the system to know that like basically everything instantiated, you can add nodes to scenes, but like the scene starts, the root scene starts, and then basically all these nodes are instantiated and their scripts all start to run. And that's kind of how things happen. And if you add a child into a scene, its scripts are that's when its initializations and all that's going to happen. So you have to kind of understand how that's all happening. And again, there's not really any memory management. So you have to worry, it's only got reference counting, not garbage collector. So it handles that all behind the scenes, but you do need to be careful of like reference cycles where if you link 5 things together and point to each other, they'll never go to a 0 reference when they kind of remove references. And so they'll hang out there in memory forever. So there's a special thing called weak ref for that. So if you're getting into scenarios like that. And of course, you don't get a lot of awesome Python things. Although I've heard of some things, there's kind of debates on the various things as this language is being iterated for Godot 4, list comprehensions, lambda functions, the with operator. a bunch of other things, the whole Python ecosystem. You can't tap into NumPy, and you can do it, but you have to go through the native interaction and do it external. And a lot of control, at the end of the day, you are kind of bound to the way Godot works, and you're operating off of that. So that's kind of quick lightning tour of GDScript. And so I'll quickly talk about the Godot data model because I feel like it's kind of intimately tied to it. So the first thing is everything is a scene within a tree of nodes. So here's an example. I'm in my scene. So I've got my root node at the top, and maybe we have a static body, which would be like the floor, and it's got a collision shape and a mesh to show it. So that's the things you bounce off of. And then you have a directional light, the sun. You might have a character, and then a couple of boxes, which are static bodies you bump into. The character, as you can see this little cinema thing down here, that means that it's actually its own scene. So it's a whole nother scene. So you can have scenes that reference scenes, and it's got this nice little modularity, a Russian doll kind of thing where each scene can have another scene. And then you can also, that's where you kind of can attach scripts and so on. So you see that little script icon means there's also a script on that. That's kind of what you see in the editor when you see the structure of a scene starting with a root node. Let's see here, and then and then the box here, you can see there's 3 scenes here. I've actually instanced the same box 3 times in this scenario. So you can instance one scene multiple times. So if you have a scene that might be a tree, you can make like 50 instances of it, and then you can have parameters you expose and tweak those parameters on the instances. So it's got a nice level of modularity. So then here's kind of my rough boxes and arrows version of this. Is like you have a scene, so there's your active scene here, and that's a start scene, the first one that starts up when you start it. It's got a bunch of children in it inside the root node, and then maybe one's a reference to another scene tree. It's got its own thing, and that scene can be also referenced to another one. So that tree could be used in 2 different experiences and so on. Attaching signal handlers. So here's just some other kind of like built-ins here. So you can declare your signal handlers, and you can see here, there's like this little green thing here on the left side that says, when you got an instance, you can say, okay, gameplay entered, let me go run this function in this script over here. And on the right side, you have kind of this sort of somewhat of the inverse, is you can actually in your script say, I want to declare a variable called power, and I want that to be editable per instance. So if I drop a fan somewhere, I can say my power for this one's 5 and this one's 3 and so on as I'm building my scene. And that kind of lets you encapsulate and kind of give things an interface for people working there, which is really nice. The scene internals. So when you have a GDScript run, here's just kind of a snapshot of one where you kind of you declare some data members up top, might be relative, collision shapes in this character here. You can see, and it's got an underscore ready, that's the first thing that's run when it enters the scene. That's where you kind of initialize things like your animations or whatever. And then you have a physics process. You have 2 different process and physics process. They run at different parts of the engine cycle. So you can you have to read about kind of how to influence the physics or anything like that if you're doing it in that game loop. Scenes can be 2D or 3D. So on the left is like a scene from one of the demo scenes where it's a full 2D game. The one on the right is actually a HUD screenshot of like that composites with a thing. So if you got your character, you add like a child that's in a control 2D scene, and it'll actually do your HUD on top, and you can control it all from there, which is nice and logical. And then another really awesome part is that Godot projects are really just folders of stuff. They're very easy to manage. I just posted one here from the Ludum Dare, which I did a long time ago, I dug around for, but it's just all the code files are there. And it's pretty easy to collaborate with people with GitHub, and you can just like check it out and coordinate with a friend and push things up. Sometimes merging scenes because they have UUIDs and it gets a little crunchy there, but for the most part, merging things and working collaboratively is really easy, and it's all very much exposed on the file structure. So there's no big project files or anything, which definitely with ActionScript and Flash, that was a problem. I think Unreal and Unity have gotten away from that and kind of moved towards this as well here. And then finally, Godot is actually built in Godot. So one of the coolest things is the whole build environment is actually just essentially a Godot game that's doing, got some extra sauce, and you can actually extend it really easy for your own project. So if you have some sort of special functionality or tooling, you can expose them. There's some built-in things to say like tool extends button. You can like have a special button, or engine.editor hint. You can have a special overlay when you're looking at it within the engine to kind of show you, maybe like if you're doing like a sneaking game, you want to have a visualization of what the range of one of those, one of the NPCs are, like what they can see. So when you're organizing, or whoever's organizing your levels, you can easily just toggle that and then add things in. It feels very straightforward once you do it. So the general takeaways, it's super fun and accessible. I think it's definitely becoming one of like the, hey, here's how to learn game dev, which is I guess, a thing now. It's kind of one of the things there. It's free. It's probably a decent way to learn about programming. I feel like I've definitely worked with my kids a little bit, and they're fifth graders, but they've had a little fun with it. So it's pretty straightforward in that. It's not a full featured language. It's not meant to be. But again, I feel like there's a lot of flow between Python and GDScript. So people who are doing Python and maybe want to have fun and build a game, or want to work with someone or do something like that, feel creative. It's probably a lot of synergy there. And same thing with people who work in Godot. That's probably feels natural to drop into Python, except for kind of jumping the deep end of the pool, maybe, in terms of what you can do. So here's a bunch of great resources. There's some really great YouTube tutorials out there. GD Quest, the kids can code. They've got some cool recipes also, just kind of cool, easy little gamelets you can make, and all that stuff. There's also a really popular Discord that's pretty busy now, with like multiple levels of like beginner help 1, beginner help 2, just so much questions going on. So it's pretty active. And finally, it's coming soon. So Godot 4 is coming up. One of the things I'm excited about, on top of better graphics, is Vulkan rendering, is also networking stuff. They're trying to kind of bring up the networking. That's one of the things that I think Unreal still has kind of monopoly on, in terms of like efficient networking. So it'd be really cool to see Godot 4 cross that threshold. And then also Ludum Dare, I'm just gonna put that's like next week, basically. That's something I do with a friend a lot of times, where it's just basically it's an informal competition to, tons of people join in, and you just make a game over the weekend. Just kind of an opportunity to be creative. You have to do some art, some music, some gameplay, some coding, try to get all done, and just have a lot of fun. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's kind of a chance to be creative and make something that's completely throwaway, and just go for it. So good for hobbyist people like me. And lots of Twitch. I mean, I've made a game. One of the games made recently, 1 or 2 of the times ago, we were like, the guys who were reviewing it were like, these guys in Germany had made a game. There were a bunch of guys, and they were just doing like a Twitch stream of reviewing a bunch of other games from the competition. It was kind of fun, and everyone was hopping on and making comments and so on. So it's very international. All right, that's it. So any questions? Happy to answer them.
Any questions? I didn't see any in the chat.
Oh, the chat has.
Or did I miss them?
No, I just see some comments, but
I have a question about the scene within a scene, I guess, off of a character.
Sure.
Would those be things like facial expressions and little animations on the character, or if someone interacted or like pushed them, and how that kicks off a different scene?
It would more be like, so each scene is really when you're within the context of one scene, that's the active scene, kind of the root scene that you're playing at that time. Each individual scene is really kind of an instance that has its own tree of things. So it would more be like your character is a scene, and then maybe the character's got a net, like who knows, like catching butterflies or something like that. And that would be its own scene. It's got its own kind of things, and you could have that childed to your character scene, and they'd be like 2 separate scenes within the scene. It's just a modularity thing. It's not so much that you play that scene, it's more that scene gets added as a node. It's just a node itself. It's just a way of encapsulating all that information in one spot, if that makes sense.
I see.
There was one question in the chat. What primarily got you into the Godot engine rather than, say, Unity? Lightweight and accessible, question mark?
Yeah, so I've been doing I've been doing like the whole like game jam thing kind of as a amusement for a long time. Actually, I think there was a Pi Week injury. I just checked in recently at like 2005 or something like that. I did like Pi Week is another one. It's like the Python, like make a game in a week thing that's been going on since literally 2005 or something like that, 2006. So I've been doing that, and I think that I ran into Godot in 2017 or 2018 when it was still Godot 2. I was really kind of, when you do like Unreal and Unity, they are slow, which I'm impatient. I'll admit that. And they've got licensing. It's like you get free license, but it's not really free. And so those are all things that push my buttons a little bit. But also I think that the Godot just felt a little bit more obvious. Like it's really kind of modular, and I really appreciate that. So it's a whole factor of those things. And I was looking for an engine that would just kind of let me experiment with fun ideas. And that like recently I made like a couple months ago, I made like after a conversation with a friend, I made a leaf blower simulation. I was like cleaning the leaves up in my backyard, and I was like, this is really satisfying. There's all these people doing like these like crazy, like, you know, truck driving simulations or like whatever, like very there's actual whole scene of like people making like weird like simulations that it's actually work, but people like farming simulator or whatever. So like leaf blowing simulator, and it was actually quite satisfying to like blow the leaves into the corner and then like scoop them up.
Cool. Last
All
call
right.
for questions.
All right.
As far as the complexity of this, you said you can do 3D games.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Is it definitely easier to do like a Donkey Kong kind of 2D kind of thing versus like little blocky people or like a Doom or a Descent?
I would say that it was originally built as a 3D engine. I do basically mostly 3D stuff just because that's what I enjoy doing. I enjoy like working a 3D map. I think it's really easy to make something in 3D pretty quickly. So I've made various platformers and whatever else. There's a lot of great tutorials on making FPS and so on. I think where you run into problems is like if you want to do multiplayer, there's no really good solution for multiplayer in terms of you have to do all that stuff yourself. So at that point, you want to look at, I mean, the same with Unity, as far as I understand, is like multiplayer. There's kind of like, you can do multiplayer, but if you want to do all the prediction stuff, which is like what you get like kind of smooth multiplayer, where you actually have to do interpolation because everything happens at a, you know, time step. That's where kind of you're looking at like either the old ones like Source Engine, which runs Half-Life and Quake Engine stuff, or you look at like Unreal. Those are the ones that are kind of effective for multiplayer. So multiplayer, not so much, not yet, maybe. And then, but I think for anything that's you're not looking for like, you know, maybe some of the more edgy stuff like open world, kind of really big open world, you might run into some challenges where you have to invent a lot of stuff that maybe you can get pre-built stuff from Unreal or Unity. But I think if you just want to make a game, again, if you those are things where you need a lot of resources like art and like stuff. That's the other big thing is that like the Unity and Unreal have big app marketplaces. So if you just want to assemble a bunch of stuff together, they'll have all that stuff built for you. You just like pay your money and you add all those apps together, and then ta-da, you have a game. Then you just need to fill in content. Whereas I think Godot gives you a lot of stuff, but you can definitely build a lot of it yourself.